Okay, let's dive into this, because today we are looking at a massive, impending socioeconomic shift. Seriously, this source predicts the literal end of traditional labor as we know it. We're breaking down a fascinating February 2026 lecture out of Changwon, and the speaker outlines a sweeping vision for the future. And it's not just about a specific region in South Korea, it's about the entire global economy and how we as individuals define our life's work. So whether you're into macroeconomics, regional development, or just wondering about the future of human labor, this explainer gives us a really compelling framework for what the next decade might actually look like.
To navigate these predictions, we're going to hit 4 key areas today. First up, 2026 as an inflection point. Second, the end of labor and the era of researchers. Third, the global focus on Hallyu. And finally, the new era philosophy of Hongik Ingen.
All right, Section 1, 2026, Bilgyong's inflection point.
So the speaker views 2026 as an absolute do-or-die turning point for the Gyeongnam, Busan, and Ulsan regions. You can almost hear the ticking clock here. The past, what they call the provincial era, where individual cities or provinces try to survive completely on their own, well, that's officially over. We're hitting a hard pivot right now in preparation for 2030, which the source actually identifies as the trigger for a massive global influx. The core message: adapt now or get left entirely behind.
Now you might be wondering what exactly needs to happen during this inflection point. Well, the absolute highest priority is the integration of Busan, Ulsan, and Gyeongnam. The era of provincial governments acting as independent siloed entities is just dead. The speaker argues that without combining into a unified massive megacity, these separate regions are going to face isolation and eventual rapid decline. They need to integrate so they have the sheer scale, the energy size, as the source puts it, to manage future growth, sustain their economies, and actually prepare for the massive global shifts headed their way.
Moving right along to Section 2, End of Labor, Era of Researchers.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core economic transition we're talking about. Over on the left is the dying paradigm, traditional factory labor and physical goods production. Now, for decades, this was the absolute backbone of regions like Gyeongnam. But look at the right side. The emerging economy is all about research activities, culture, education, and welfare. The idea of just making things to sell just to survive, that's an era that is rapidly closing. Instead, the source claims society must pivot toward intellectual and cultural outputs.
Of course, looking at that massive shift, a super obvious question arises. Who will make the goods?
The answer is blunt and immediate. Robots will do it. The speaker emphasizes an impending, extremely rapid change, where physical manufacturing labor is completely automated. Once we hit this inflection point, the speed of change is going to be staggering, removing the human element from physical production almost entirely. I mean, it's a pretty wild thought, right? The literal end of factory labor.
And this leads us to a highly provocative claim from the lecture. The speaker states, "The era of labor is ending. Labor is a modern slavery system. We must live as researchers. The traditional concept of working for a wage, trading your physical time and effort simply to be fed and housed, is framed here as an outdated, almost subjugating system. Instead, citizens are meant to transition completely into researchers, utilizing their minds rather than their physical bodies."
To justify this, the speaker provides a really fascinating historical timeline. Think about it. For 5,000 years, only the elite class, the Serayebu, held knowledge. The general populace was essentially kept uneducated. Then, post-World War II, a massive shift occurred. Through the Korean alphabet Hangul, universal education was finally brought to everyone. And that brings us to today, where we have a fully, highly educated populace. The argument here is that you simply cannot take a society with higher education and force them into manual labor. By definition of our education, we're all meant to be researchers now.
Which brings us to Section 3. The world focuses on Hallyu.
Remember that timeline from earlier? The speaker specifically highlights the target year of 2030. This is identified as the exact moment when a massive global population will start flocking to Korea. Specifically, the integrated megacity region we just discussed, with Busan transforming into a premier maritime cultural city, will become a global hub. The idea is that the world isn't just going to consume Korean culture from afar anymore. They are actively preparing to physically come.
Now, what's really interesting here is the striking demographic data backing this up. Look at who is actively learning the Korean language globally right now. A whopping 70% are youth and women, while older men make up the remaining 30%. The speaker views this as a massive, impending cultural wave. The youth and women of the world are fundamentally aligning themselves with Korean language and culture.
And that's a leading indicator that by 2030, this exact demographic wave will be knocking on the door, looking for the cultural and intellectual leadership that this new era of researchers is supposed to provide.
Let's look at Section 4, Hangik Ingen, New Era Philosophy.
So, if the world is coming, what exactly do we teach them? Because let's be honest, just having great technology or pop culture isn't enough to lead humanity. The answer, according to the source, lies in an ancient concept, Hangik Ingen. This is defined as the philosophy of broadly benefiting humanity. The speaker notes this is the unifying, foundational ideology that has preserved the Korean nation for millennia, essentially preventing it from being absorbed by larger empires. And they argue this shouldn't just be a historical footnote. It actually must be the core mindset that will attract, anchor, and ultimately lead the modern world.
To put this into a modern economic context, the speaker contrasts two very different eras. On the left, we have the corporate growth era. This is the past, focused entirely on blind expansion, maximizing scale, and accumulating individual wealth. But on the right, we have what the speaker calls the business era. In this new paradigm, driven by Hangik Ingen, the goal of business is no longer just growth for the sake of growth, it is specifically to elevate human welfare and broadly benefit society. Basically, if you're just trying to get rich and survive, you belong to the old era.
It all really boils down to this quote. If you live right, anyone can live in a good world. If you act wrongly, everyone faces hardship. Adopting the Hangik Ingen mindset isn't framed as just a nice feel-good moral idea. It's framed as an absolute, universal law for future prosperity. The logic is that if a region, or even a person, only tries to benefit themselves, they will absolutely fail in this new era. Success will strictly come from how broadly you can benefit others.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question. Are we ready to stop surviving as laborers and start leading as researchers benefiting humanity? The source material paints a really vivid picture of a world moving away from the factory floor and toward a globally connected, intellectually driven society centered on mutual benefit. It's a massive paradigm shift demanding that we rethink our regions, our jobs, and our ultimate purpose. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and start thinking like a researcher.